All right, cool.
I don't think it needs to start until actually 7 o'clock. I'm sorry that.
What it said. Oh, sorry. Did I just make you nervous? I know. Okay, thank you. Fair.
Just 1 second.
I think now it's 7 o'clock.
I was looking at my phone here.
He's
Is
in.
that on the button?
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
Okay, we're gonna call this meeting to order. And
Is your microphone on? Thank you.
we're gonna call this meeting to order. It's rough, but we're gonna do
We're
it.
gonna get there.
We're gonna call this meeting to order, and the first thing we're gonna do is, Dana, would you read the roll call?
Sure thing. Commissioner Orsi.
Here.
Commissioner Scobie.
Here.
Yay. Vice Chair Jukowski.
Here.
Chair Slothauer.
Here.
Commissioner Norman.
Here.
Commissioner Frey.
Here.
Commissioner Starbuck.
Here.
All present.
Everybody's present, and so did everybody read all the minutes from the last three?
Yes. Yes.
Did anybody have any objections to anything in there? Then if there are no objections, the minutes will be approved as written.
And I'll just make a note that I think we're moving to what's called action minutes, where they'll be less detailed. It was taking our minutes taker a very long time to get through minutes, which is why you have 3 before you also, because we took December off. But so the format of the minutes may change. The other thing that we're doing though is we do record all of these meetings, and all of the meetings will now be available on YouTube on the city's website. So you'll be able to watch the meeting and and then have the action minutes to go with it. So,
Okay, so the minutes will basically be action items.
yes, Nikki's taking action minutes tonight, right? So we'll see what they look like at the next meeting.
You don't look very active over there. Okay, now we will open it up to public comment where people can comment on any subject that is not on the agenda. And it says 3 minutes here. We're gonna move that for now anyway. We're gonna move it to 4 minutes. If somebody has something to say, gives people a little more time to make their point. Anybody want to speak? Oh, well, this is going quick. Okay, so we are going to have a hearing. What?
Nothing.
So we do have a written comment though about an item that isn't on the agenda. Do we need to make any comment about that?
I assume the fact it was written means I don't have to read it or anything, do I?
You do have to read it, but I mean, you don't have to read it out loud.
Oh,
And it's,
I've read it.
well, I think the person would appreciate it if you did read it. And it's just for your information. She wanted it submitted to you. So you're welcome to discuss it if you want to.
Okay, well, then I'll read it. I mean, I have read it. I'll read it out loud.
You know,
You don't have
you
to.
don't have to do that.
Oh, okay.
read it.
What, does anybody have any comments on it?
I think she makes some good points.
She does.
I think it's a good example of not everything needs to be changed or enhanced. I think some things are very good the way they are, like the boardwalk, for example. I think the port does an excellent job maintaining and enhancing the boardwalk. So yeah, I agree with her. Not everything needs to be changed or it can't even necessarily be improved.
Right, and some of the things though that she brings up is like maintenance and stuff and how we dealing with that, but that's not for us to deal with right now.
Right. And I think the overall theme that I got from it was that she's concerned about the homogenization of Bandon.
And mentions that she's seen it happen in other towns,
Yes,
like, I mean.
the gentrification leads to homogenization.
Yeah, but that's gonna be a long time before it happens here, I think. But anyway.
Is that low enough?
Yeah, and then talk lower.
Voice up.
Okay. Now can I open it?
Yes, yes, you're welcome to.
Okay, I now declare this public hearing open at, oh, that clock is so wrong.
7:05.
At 7:05. On 1/24/24, 1/25/24. This is an official public hearing before the Planning Commission of the City of Bandon for application 23055, an amendment to the heavy industrial zone code and the comprehensive plan. Applicable criteria related to this action are listed in the staff report, available online through the city's website and as part of tonight's meeting agenda, which is here. Please address your comments to these criteria and the criteria you believe apply to this decision. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford this decision-making body and the parties involved an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal based on that issue. Official notice is hereby given that the Planning Commission can consider laws, ordinances, court decisions, etc., without having them established as evidence at the hearing record, in the hearing record. A couple of the minutes of the hearing, as well as the rules and procedures, will be available to the city offices, at the city offices, in the city offices. Hey, any of them work.
In or at, doesn't matter.
What does the staff have to report?
All right, I've got a brief presentation for you and the folks in the audience. So yes, as a reminder, this is the a heavy industrial amendment to allow aquaculture. This is an item that I believe we first talked about in a work session nearly or maybe over a year ago. It was a request from the Port of Bandon to allow for such a use on this property. They did some of the heavy lifting background work, in particular on one of the properties that we discovered was zoned heavy industrial. So that's the Moore Mill Log Yard is what we call it in town. So the history on that one, you might remember, was that there was some question about what its zoning was. Our zoning map said that it was controlled development 1. Our comprehensive plan map said it was industrial. There was no record of any decision by the city ever being made to change it from its industrial designation. And so the city council passed a resolution sort of memorializing the work that local consultant Sherry McGrath did in researching the topic and determining that it should revert back to its original zoning, which is heavy industrial. And so there was a desire on that particular property to allow for an aquaculture use. A further sort of thorn in the side of this project was that a future planner, after the zoning map had changed that lot to CD1, had based some changes in the shoreland overlay zone in our comprehensive plan on that particular CD1 designation, and made some determinations about that particular lot, calling it CD1 and not heavy industrial, and then amended or created a matrix in the shoreland overlay that disallowed industrial uses on there. It also said that on that particular lot, you could only do aquaculture on a 50-foot buffer along the edge of it. So what this code amendment does is sort of fix the ripple effects of that inaccurate zone change, and then also goes into allowing aquaculture. So I'm sort of giving you a background, and then I'll tell you what code we're actually changing. So if you can go to the next slide. So the particular request or the things that you're changing are we're going to amend Title 17.56, the heavy industrial zone, to allow for aquaculture. And then we're also, there's a provision in there to allow for dwelling units. There's also an opportunity for us to talk further about other limitations or conditions you might put on an aquaculture use, but that's what I proposed for you tonight based on our previous conversations. It would also amend Title 17.76, which is that shoreland overlay zone, and in particular, Management Unit 8, which is the management unit of the shoreland overlay that applies to that Moore Mill log yard. The other thing to note that Sherry pointed out is that there's some inconsistencies between the matrix that's in our adopted municipal code and the comprehensive plan. So one of the things we might also do is decide what's the which one should be accurate, the comp plan or the zone code. And then finally, just making some amendments to the comprehensive plan text for consistency with those code changes. So mostly that's crossing out any references to that particular lot as CD1 and instead referencing it as heavy industrial. So if you can go to the next slide. Just wanted to point out the two lots. So the lot with the red star on the north, that's the one, it still says CD1 in this map, but that's the one that should be zoned heavy industrial. And then there's only one other lot in town inside city limits. There is some heavy industrial land in the urban growth boundary, but these are the two that this particular code amendment would affect. So getting into the changes, the requested definition of aquaculture would be the cultivation of marine, estuarine, or freshwater aquatic organisms for commercial, recreational, restoration, and/or scientific purposes. It's pretty broad. I believe that it would have to be changed. We'd add the definition into the city's municipal code, which would be a new definition, and then we would be amending the existing definition in the comprehensive plan. And then if you can go to the next slide. Yes. So this is the language. This is listed in your staff report. It might be easier to read on there. But what we wanted to allow in the permitted uses was that in the heavy industrial zone, we'd allow the following uses as outright permitted along with their accessory uses. And you can let me know if you'd rather define that further. We sort of kept that broad, but staff would interpret it as any sort of like an accessory use would be storage sheds or maybe auxiliary tanks or these sort of items that you can't necessarily qualify as a building and that might be added onto later, but wouldn't change the size of the overall project site. And so the use, we recommended that in the permitted uses, you do aquaculture provided the total square footage of such use is smaller than 10 acres. And then in conditional uses, aquaculture uses more than 10 acres. So you sort of have a point where you can say, we feel comfortable allowing this outright. And if it's any larger, go ahead.
Why did you guys pick 10 acres?
I would say a somewhat arbitrary number. I wanted to pick something that felt like under 10 acres might be more manageable, but you can certainly amend that number if you feel like 5 or 15 or 20, whatever feels more normal to you. But what would be considered small scale versus maybe a more impactful use? The conditional, if you did have it as a conditional use, the planning commission would have the opportunity to hear the request and ask for additional information. Something over 10 acres, you might want to ask about transportation, or you might want to ask about for additional evidence related to noise or glare or odor, pollution, whatever it is.
Right.
So certainly that number, you can change it if you want.
I was just curious. It seems reasonable.
Yeah. Well, have a discussion and hear what the public has to say.
Okay.
But yeah, certainly it was just a way to sort of say maybe a smaller use feels like you could do it as a type 2 decision, and a more intense use you might want to have as a type 3 decision. Okay, next one. This would be limitations on uses. So this, you could add some additional parameters in here. Sometimes I hate the word sideboards, but it's a good probably phrase to use in this case, that you'd want to set some boundaries on what is or is not allowed, particularly related to residential units. So I want to be careful to point out that although aquaculture doesn't seem like I don't know, maybe offensive use, other uses in a heavy industrial zone might do that. And heavy industrial is generally set aside for some of the most offensive uses that are out there. So things that by nature are probably loud or smelly or that sort of thing. So generally, I think cities shy away from allowing residential uses in conjunction with heavy industrial uses. Because this particular request for aquaculture seems like it might be manageable to have residential units on site. I think you could allow them as long as they're incidental and subordinate to the outright permitted or conditional use on the same parcel. So it's not, allowing rampant single-family dwellings to build adjacent to this, but really the idea is that we know housing is hard to come by here. And if you had researchers or employees or interns or managers units, you might want those located on site at a pretty low density.
So Dana, you identified in here 5 units of 1,000 square feet, right? For a total of 5,000 square feet. Is that just it's just an example that you were making, or?
Yeah, just a starting point. So
Okay.
again, it was so we proposed a density of no more than 1 unit per 2 acres. And then the total square footage of each unit be less than 1,000 square feet. But those numbers, again, are just a starting point. So you're welcome to amend those or have a discussion about those.
And the intention here is to have people that are working at on this aquamarine project or visiting it for purposes of assisting the project. That would be places for them to stay versus
That was the
if I wanted to
idea.
buy a house in there,
Mhm.
No, it would be for.
Yeah.
Related.
So one of the requirements would that be that the residential use would have to be on the same parcel or contiguous parcel to the ownership of aquaculture. So the units couldn't be sold separately. They'd have to be used in conjunction with that aquaculture use. So that's what I said. We wouldn't want like to put a new neighborhood down there, but for the folks, if someone does propose to use this property for this use, that they might have a place where they could house their employees on site.
For curiosity's sake, how
Can
did-
you turn your microphone on? Sorry.
Just out of curiosity, how did you come up with wanting only 1 house per 2 acres?
It was just again, I hate to say arbitrary, it was an educated guess at what might be reasonable. So when I thought about 10 acres of use, perhaps 5 units might be enough for them. But it's just a starting point, so you're welcome to amend that from there.
So you're not saying the actual buildings have to be only 1 house per 2 acres?
No.
So you could have
No.
5 units
Okay.
Yes.
as a 5-plex.
Just to clarify, the density of the overall project site, so if they defined their project site as being 10 acres, then they could have 5 total units and they could be attached
That makes sense.
dormitory style
Yep, that makes sense.
stuff.
So what we're calling a dwelling unit is not a single family residence.
It could be.
It's- It could be,
It
but
could.
it's not specific to that. It could be like you just said, a dormitory,
Yes, I did not,
plex, triplex, depending on how
Sure.
long. Okay.
yeah, I purposefully kept it vague, not knowing what someone doing this type of project might want.
Mhm.
And to allow for some public comment or some additional thought or research, so. I'm glad you guys are interested and talking about it. And again, each unit would be 1,000 feet, but again, you can change that number if you feel like that's too small or too big for what you're going for. But the idea was to just accommodate some of those workers, researchers, that sort of thing on site. And then next slide. So the other changes would be to the shoreland overlay zone and comp plan. I did not copy in the matrix here for you because it was a little complicated. It is in your, in the staff report here. The changes would be to, management unit 8, which is currently listed as a controlled development management unit. We would be proposing to change that, to an industrial management unit, and allow aquaculture to be permitted. And
Quick
just,
question.
yeah, go ahead.
You called it, I noticed in other places it's referred to as HI, heavy industrial or industrial. Does that make any difference?
So heavy industrial is the zoning code designation.
Right.
I industrial would be the comprehensive plan designation.
Okay.
So I might recommend that you keep it at I and not HI in case there's another point in time where you have maybe a light industrial property on the waterfront and you'd want to put it under that same management unit.
Okay.
So it's just sort of the more broad umbrella. So changing aquaculture to permitted, water dependent commercial uses to permitted, water dependent industrial uses to permitted, log storage to permitted, water dependent recreational uses to permitted, water dependent, water related recreational uses to conditional use, and not dependent or related recreational uses to conditional use. So, I mean, one of the interesting things, I think, when you think about the particular property that this would affect that's on the waterfront, is that it seems to make no sense to me as to why we would have disallowed or, not permitted aquaculture on a site that very clearly would work very well for that use. So I want to say that this feels like a very common sense alignment here, but I think there's opportunity for further discussion about what we've made permitted or conditional use. And I guess I'll back up very quickly and say, for those of you who don't know what the shoreland overlay is, I should have probably given you a little overview, but the shoreland overlay is the way that the city implements the coastal goal related to shorelands, which is anything that sort of abuts a body of water. So that would be both the beach and our estuary and our coastal lake, which would be Redmond Pond. And so the provisions of that code are sort of the more restrictive apply. If the use is permitted in the underlying zone and permitted in the shoreland overlay, then it's permitted, but there's still a list of rules that they would have to follow if they were doing any use there. If it's conditional use in the underlying zone, but permitted in the shoreland overlay, it becomes a conditional use, or vice versa. So if it's permitted in the underlying zone, but conditional in the shoreland, it's still a conditional use. So it's a little bit of a restrictive zone to just make sure that that we're not affecting negatively any of the lands that are sort of sensitive along our bodies of water. Does that make sense? Okay. And then I'm not going to read the comprehensive plan changes unless you want me to, because like I said, most of them are just sort of crossing out small changes. Does anyone desire that I go through all of them individually? You do?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm kidding.
Okay, because I mean, generally, we're just crossing out things like, I'll just give you a brief overview. There's a statement that says there's no demand for waterfront industrial land in Bandon. Like, I'm not sure that that's true. And so we recommend striking that language out, especially because we've discovered that this land is industrial and on the waterfront in Bandon.
Well, there is one thing I'd like to bring up.
Sure
Right-
thing.
Right above that,
Mm-hmm.
where your number 6 locations, number 4 is the Bandon Airport area. And then number 6 is the Bandon Airport area again.
That's a great inconsistency in the comprehensive plan that I did not intend to change, but we could look at it and
I
see.
Just cross out the Bandon Airport area and let
That's
it go.
really
5.
Funny. Okay, well, it wouldn't be related to this particular
I know.
amendment. So perhaps we could change that in a code or comprehensive plan cleanup, which
Anyway,
we'll have coming up this year.
Reading it, I got confused.
That is fair. I would also be confused by
I
that.
confuse easily.
Okay, and then next slide. So this one is just sort of, I did a little analysis of the issues in the staff report for you to help your discussion today. One of them was I had a question about the difference between aquaculture versus mariculture. And I'll again note that there are some people in the audience who are far more educated on this topic than me. So I'll give you an overview, but feel free to ask them questions if they come up to talk. But aquaculture, from my research, appears to be the sort of larger umbrella term used to incorporate multiple types of aquatic cultivation, for lack of a better word. So the mariculture is more specialized because it uses seawater in either open ocean. It's like where, they're growing something in the open ocean, going out and getting it, and then bringing it back, or using that ocean water in tanks. Aquaculture can be any type of water, including fresh water. So mariculture is just a little bit more specific. There may be pros and cons to that we may want to identify or discuss further. And if so, you can direct staff to do a little more research. The other one I already mentioned, just housing in an industrial zone. I think that should be discussed further about, whether or not you want to set any other limitations on that use, change any of those numbers. The permitted versus conditional use. So I think that there is an interesting fine line to walk here where, should you want this use to exist, I always think conditional uses are just sort of that additional barrier to development, but sometimes very necessary when you're talking about, uses that are impactful, could have a great impact in the neighborhood, something like that. So that's why we propose that sort of split. To give maybe a developer the opportunity to build on that site without going through the sort of 6 to 8 month long process of a conditional use permit. Or, setting parameters as a type 2 decision, so we could still notice the neighbors within 100 square feet. You still have the opportunity now to sort of set the code criteria that are specific to aquaculture that you want applied for that smaller scale. So I think you could discuss, if there's anything else that should be included as part of a type 2 or type 3 decision, and where you want to draw the line between permitted and conditional, if you want to draw any line at all. And then, finally, just that shoreland overlay, it may be worth discussing further, and I am happy to reach out to the folks at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. But there's some findings that usually need to be made related to this term, especially suited for water dependent uses. My understanding is that we set aside particular pieces of land for what's called that ESWD, and those are lands that can't be used for anything other than that water dependent use. Currently, and maybe this is thinking too broadly on this one, but if you can't remove any land from the especially suited for water dependent uses, but you can add it, and then you can take land out of other places. So it may be interesting to look at, and we can do a calculation of how much ESWD land we have and whether or not adding in any of this additional land allows you to look at removing land from the ESWD elsewhere in Bandon. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's up to you as to whether or not you want to, as part of this change, also designate that property as ESWD or some portion of it. Do you have any questions for me?
Oh, man.
You-
So
Go ahead.
one question I have. So we have the more lumber mill site.
Yes.
Is that the same piece of property that also includes the truck shop? Or is the truck shop a different parcel?
That might be, I believe the property owner is here this evening. I believe there are actually 3 lots that are sort of part of that larger lot, 3 individual tax lots, and that the log yard may be separate from the truck shop. But I'm gonna let them answer that question for you.
Gotcha. Okay.
Is there a reason why you're asking that? And is it because we're referring to the Moore Mill log yard in the comprehensive plan? And that may not be all inclusive of all the lots out there.
I just wanted to know if it was a separate lot.
Okay.
Separate parcel of land. That's what the question was.
Well,
intended to-
I think it's a good question, but I think it's also, maybe I'm reading too far into it, but I think it's a good question because one of the things our comprehensive plan does is identify lots by previous uses, like it references a Masonic Park, which I had to like ask Mary and go to the museum to figure out what that was, and a veneer plant that hasn't been here for a long time. So it may be worth amending the comprehensive plan to be more clear about which lot you're referring to, or we are referring to, since there may be multiple interpretations.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
So the 5 residential units, which you arbitrarily identified,
Yes,
is that correct?
yes, that is correct.
So,
I'm calling it an educated guess. I feel like arbitrary is to like, I just threw something
Okay.
out there.
okay, so, we could be talking about 10 residential units, right? Potentially.
How, based on how big that lot is? Yes. You could also limit it and just say, but no more than, if you were if you were concerned about that.
Right, okay. So, the large driver of all of this, other than our intense desire to make everything consistent between the code and the comprehensive plan. That aside, the driver behind this is the aquamarine project on the Moore Mill site, right? That's what got this all, excuse me,
Aquaculture.
aquaculture, excuse me. On the Moore Mill site.
That's correct.
So this is a what if question. So if this all gets approved and the aquaculture project gets started, it's built. But let's say, this is the what if part, let's say it goes belly up after 5 years and it's out of business. So at that point, we've got the, whatever buildings they have, plus we have these 5 residential units. The decisions that we're making, I mean, I'm wondering what the consequences of that would be.
So I think what you're asking is if this use went out of business, but the residential units remained, are we putting ourselves in an uncomfortable position to now have 5 residential units in a heavy industrial zone that could potentially be affected by something else? Okay, I think, so that's why we wrote it to say residential uses may be permitted as accessory uses with aquaculture if they are in conjunction with and incidental and subordinate to a permitted or conditional use on the same parcel. So there would have to be an active aquaculture use in order for those residential units to be occupied. I think that could put us in an uncomfortable position, right? We have a housing crisis. There could be housing units available and no aquaculture use. What does that do? And that's something you could certainly think about it, but from a staff perspective, those residential units shouldn't be in use unless there is a permitted, you could put active aquaculture use in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are you done?
Yes, yeah, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or you're welcome to move on to public comment and come back to me.
Well, I think we're gonna have some questions for the people running it up here.
I have some questions there.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just a couple clarifications, please, on the shoreland map.
Mhm.
There's a strip of land bordering, segment number 8 called, and it's labeled number 3E. Is that 50-foot buffer? What is that and how does that relate to rezoning or codifying this as a? heavy industrial?
That's a great question. Yeah, so the 3E is that especially suited for water dependent use that could be used
Ah.
for, and that aquaculture use that's called out in the comp plan. We could, I'd have to look at the shoreland overlay map to see if that 3E is anywhere else. Cause I think it affects more than one property, so then we may want to amend the comprehensive or the shoreland overlay map to just remove 3E from that particular location and make the whole thing 8. I think that's a great question.
And along with that one, across the river is area labeled 8C on the map. Would that C go away or is that specific? Is that federal land or state land? Borders the river over by the North.
That's the Bullards Beach
Mhm.
Management Unit. Well, you're asking great questions about weird old maps. We may have to look and change that one too. So the management units are associated with a map, which we could pull up if we need. Would that be helpful for everyone to see? Okay, give me 1 second. Talk amongst yourselves.
But across the river is Lord's.
Yeah, boards.
I didn't have
There's
that.
another map that Dana passed me a link to that is it.
And then put them down.
Dana, do you have that color map that you passed me the link to? That's the one that I think was probably the clearest.
I don't know if that was.
Okay. That's the one that I asked the questions on, the 3E strip and then the 8C area designated over on the north side.
You mean at the Bullards area?
Right,
Yeah,
Yeah, it seems kind of odd, but.
I didn't think we had anything
I
to
think
do with that.
I was thinking
Right.
you
25 years
wouldn't have
old.
anything.
Yeah, what's that?
I would think the same as you. We
Just
would
where
have
the
no
lighthouse
jurisdiction.
is.
That would be state.
There's an
Yeah.
park.
area of it.
Yeah,
It's a little blurry, so I'm gonna.
It's part of the
tell
city.
State park.
that.
No, it's part of the city.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
This is so bad. Sorry, these
I
maps
thought it
are
was state park.
horrible. Let me just say, these maps are really not good. We did get a grant to update these maps because they're all in this old sort of paper form and they're really hard to see. And the digital copy of the new GIS version is not yet available. So we're gonna work with what we've got and I'm gonna try to do my best to be loud and explain what it says to you. Okay, so that is Management Unit 8. This section here where it says 3E is what Bill was talking about. That is the 50-foot buffer. This over here, that's what you were referring to?
Yes, that's correct.
That says Management Unit 10. So that's why I said the other color map might not be totally accurate.
Okay,
Which, I'm gonna sit down so people can hear me. So the Bullards Beach would be Management Unit 10, which is natural resources, which does make sense to me, the NR. So if there's any other section that's Management Unit 8 that I missed, we may need to move that into a different management unit, but I think those are the big ones. Does anyone have any other, do you have any, did I answer your question?
yes, you
Okay.
did. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think a great point about 3E. Because there is more than one 3E, so it's anywhere that's especially suited for water dependent uses. We would have to leave, so like I said, you can't get rid of any ESWD land, but the training we were at earlier, they said you can sort of swap ESWD as long as there's like no new net loss. So if it made more sense for us to put all of the ESWD land on that particular property and remove it from Old Town, you could consider that. Maybe not as part of this change, but just something to think about. Okay,
And how does ESWD land interact if aquaculture was allowed in Unit 8? If you have this buffer there, would that preclude someone doing aquaculture directly in the river? And it would be land-based only, or how?
ooh, you're asking me some good, tough questions. So ESWD land, the reason that we're required to do it is that the state wants us to set aside land that would only be available for uses that would benefit from being near a body of water. So that's where their idea is that they don't want you doing non-water dependent uses on those particular properties. We just had a conversation about this the other day. A good example was like the city of Newport had a bunch of land that hotels wanted to go into and retail shops, but because it was zoned with this ESWD overlay, it could not develop. There was much frustration for a long time, but it was then later available for the research facility from the OSU research facility. So that's why we have those sort of uses set aside as for things like aquaculture, right? You couldn't really do them anywhere where you weren't near water. So we want to save those lands. And this, I mean, it does feel like a site that probably would always benefit from a water dependent use. So it's just something to think about if you wanted to amend that. I'm thinking through though, I think you could keep the ESWD kind of edge there and then still have the other part of the lot zoned for industrial and keep all of the same permitted uses to make it less complicated.
Yeah, my understanding when I read through this stuff was that ESWD stuff, as long as you're doing aquaculture, it didn't make any difference.
So you don't think it would preclude,
No,
Mm-mm.
I don't, it
it
didn't.
would coexist with aquaculture?
In what
Because
my
it is
reading,
water dependent.
yeah, it's water dependent and on the water dependent commercial uses under ESWD are outright permitted.
Yeah, and the thing to think about is if we did end up taking away something, so if we took away the 3E, we'd actually have to go back and probably renotice, because then at that point it would require a measure 56 of all landowners. We'd be taking away their ability to do something. So that everything is written that it's become less restrictive, not more like we're adding the uses, not taking anything away. So if we did want to change that, you have to let me know and we'd have to renotice and start all over, which is fine.
Well, some of these questions, I mean, doesn't that make it pertinent how many parcels there are in this management unit?
Why?
Or does it not matter?
You mean, as far as like who's affected and who's not?
Yeah,
Say more. I'm not sure I'm following.
well, I mean, so you've got management unit 8, but it's different parcels,
Mm-hmm.
which potentially could have different uses, right? One
Mhm.
parcel could be for mariculture, one parcel could be for aquaculture, one parcel could be for a McDonald's.
I don't think we allow McDonald's in heavy industrial, but other than that, yes, correct. You
Is-
could have
Is
different
McDonald's
uses.
water related?
Well,
Like
they use a lot of water.
the facilities that are already there that Moore Mill uses could continue to operate, and then they could do aquaculture in a different piece of that property. So yes, to your point, you could have uses next to each other.
I retract my McDonald's comment, but it could be an Amazon project, which uses a lot of water for computers, cool computers.
I don't
I'm just
think I
wondering.
qualify.
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't that be a water dependent?
Well, so
Not for my
in the
stuff.
heavy industrial zone, the only outright permitted use is public utility, including service structures right now. Everything else is a conditional use. So any sort of manufacturing, repairing, compounding, fabrication, processing, packaging, storage, government building or use, or sales of products manufactured on site, those are all conditional uses right now. So we're not proposing any changes to what you can already do on that site other than adding in this new use. But yeah, I mean, I don't think Amazon is going to cite anything here, but I also don't think there's anything really stopping them from that particular site. But again, it would go to you as a conditional use.
Okay.
Before anything happened. Any other questions? These are good questions.
So
No, you had your chance. I don't
I had
hear
my
about
limit.
Amazon.
I had my limit. No, we're off of Amazon. I'm somewhere else.
Amazon,
So-
McDonald's, who else are you campaigning for this evening?
So, I wanted to ask about,
Hmm.
aquaculture versus mariculture.
Yes.
So mariculture being the more specific or
Mhm.
limiting
Yes.
project, right? So how would the city benefit from doing that versus having a more broad approving the heavy industrial for a broader type of use?
I don't think that we would, which is why we've recommended aquaculture instead of mariculture. So that's that umbrella. You could do saltwater or freshwater. Again, I'm not an expert. There may be some pros or cons to one or the other, and we could look into that further if there's any concerns from the planning commission. But I don't see any reason why you would limit. I did just get a question from a planning commissioner about what's the difference, because originally we had written aquaculture, mariculture, and other similar uses. And then I understood later that aquaculture is sort of takes care of that. You can cross out mariculture and other similar uses.
Mhm.
Because it's more all encompassing.
Anybody else?
I had a question.
Yes.
Is there still a private entity interested in developing aquaculture at this site? I know when we visited the port, they had kind of indicated that the timing and the delays made them look at other locations, maybe in different cities, and I'm wondering if they're still potentially looking at the site or if this is just for future development.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I would say in general, this is sort of just setting us up. Should someone be interested in citing something here, you're now taking care of it now before they approach us and say, we'd love to do this here, but it's not allowed. So
But if we
Um,
could open this up to the people going to speak, then maybe we could get answers to a few of these other questions.
I'm sure you could. Are there any other questions from planning commissioners? No. Okay.
Okay,
I
um,
have, I have one last question. Is there a way to word the zoning that encourages dormitory type dwellings? When I read like 1 unit per 2 acres, I think of like a single family home kind of by itself. And I know in the discussion, you said we could group all 5 together, but is there a way to word it that it actually encourages dormitory housing? Or
I think so. I mean, we could be more specific about what types of housing were permitted. If there was a type of housing you did or didn't want to see, we could include that more specifically in the language. So I've got that on the list of things in your discussion that we should talk about. Thank you.
any more? Okay, I'd like to open it up to the public. And again, we're gonna I don't think we're gonna limit it right now because we've have a lot of questions for the people from the port and people from Moores. So let's see. Anyway, who's first that's gonna speak? Nikki, do you have people signed up? No? Jeff?
You're being called upon. Sorry. That's not normally how public comment works.
No,
It's more voluntary than that.
no, no volunteers here. That's,
How's that? Good evening. Yeah, commissioners, Jeff Griffin, Port Abandon. We're supportive of this. We brought it forward over a year ago. You've all been out and looked at our kind of test facility, the proof of concept, and we demonstrated you can grow certain types of mariculture pretty well in the estuary, seaweed in particular, and then creatures that like to eat seaweed, like urchins and potentially abalone. Probably are the primary ones that we're focusing on. But the whole marine commercial zone in town allows aquaculture as a permitted use. That's why we could get the thing started. And I've been a proponent of as a permitted use on this site, on the mill site, because it'll just take, like you said, remove one more barrier and be a little more enticing to try to get a good project going. I think the 10-acre threshold is probably reasonable, though, because that would be a pretty large operation, greater than 10, and that makes sense as a type 3 review for that.
Yeah, we proposed, and maybe I didn't put it in here, it's for discussion to either do like outright permitted, but do it as a type 2 reviews because there's some discretion in talking about housing types,
Mhm.
kind of, and how you might allow them. But then doing type 3 if you were doing any sort of larger project. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So generally supportive. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question to Catherine's question, actually. Is there still a private entity interested?
Well, they took a step back,
Okay.
but I'm not sure if we'd have to communicate back with them. It's been a while since we've communicated, so they may be on some other projects now in other parts of the country. They may not. If they're not, I would think there's others that will be interested.
Okay, I have another question that I was wondering about. Now, this water in the river is sometimes it's fresh, sometimes it's brackish.
Mhm.
Does that make a difference to what you're doing, to the types of things that we're proposing here?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that. I think aquaculture is probably the best term to use, and it is umbrella. Some seaweeds actually prefer lower salinity, not full ocean salinity, which is about 35 parts per thousand. Some seaweeds want about 25. They do best at 25 parts per thousand. So it's brackish water. And I don't know what that would fall under, if it's strictly mariculture, or, I don't know.
That's why we're going with ag.
So I think aqua
Yeah.
is probably the best, and that would give us the most flexibility.
Yeah, I don't
Species.
think we want to debate that. I was just wondering is, now that you're moving up the river a little ways, is that going to affect the types of things that you're looking at? I mean, you've done your
Mhm,
test ones down by your building.
mhm.
Now you're moving up a ways. Is the water,
So actually the water's deeper at that bend in the river. And so that means there's more ocean water underneath.
Mhm.
That's another reason that's an attractive spot.
that's right, you told me that. I
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have to worry about the fresh water coming down quite.
Well,
as
no, you
much.
still have to monitor it.
Yeah.
And everything, but I think you'd be allowed to pull water actually more often than we can where we're pulling it now.
Okay. Did you have, anybody else have any questions here? All right, did you have anything in mind for the types of housing that? I mean, you must have some idea of the number of people it's gonna take to do this and stuff, so what kind of housing were you thinking of? Students and researchers and people moving through. Also, you're gonna need some for, for, like you say, a manager or a
Right.
worker, maybe two for
You
people.
know, probably a really good question for the owners. I guess my thinking is it's too early to tell, and it
Okay.
depends on what actually goes forward. Is it gonna be a sole proprietary operation, with a particular, or is it gonna be a broader, more R&D focused? Is it gonna be a blend? It's really hard to say at this point, how many folks on site you would want to try to house. 5 on a 10-acre could be enough if it was a pretty limited operation. I mean, it wouldn't house all the employees, but it might house maybe some of the employees that are traveling in for certain things, consulting or something, and plus a caretaker. It's really hard to speculate, I guess. It's almost like I'd rather not be tied down to that, but maybe if it was greater than 5, it would go through a different review process. I don't know.
So I think, yeah, one of the things, that's what I meant when I said you could do type 2 for housing, is one of the things they've said with housing has to be outright permitted in every zone, like subject to clear and objective standards, but you can create an alternative path. So you could do something like the standard is 1 unit per 2-acre density. And if you want to do more than that, it becomes a type 2 path.
uh,
Or type 3, or however you want to do it. It's probably easier to do type
Conditional
2.
Yeah.
use.
Yeah, something to allow for the opportunity for them to request something different should they need it, but that we have that standard listed for housing.
Okay,
It's basic. And again, those numbers you can change.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Hello, Sherry McGrath, Bandon, Oregon. A couple things on the housing that comes to my mind is, we had talked about it being more of a transient or an educational housing. And when you look at the definition of a dwelling unit being defined as a self-contained kitchen, bathroom, sleeping area. So I hear the concern about maybe having these empty, single-family looking residences on the site at some point. So some thoughts I had while I was listening to your conversation was heavy industrial zones typically allow for a caretaker's residence. So maybe that's your standalone, and then the other residential units perhaps are based on, if it's based on density, maybe it's opened up, so it's not a dwelling unit, but more of a rooms with a shared kitchen, shared bathroom. So that way you could have a smaller footprint and it could be a little bit easier to be self-contained. That was just a thought. As far as the definition, that working definition came from the state, actually. So when Dana and I met with, is that Pam?
What working definition?
The one that said aquaculture, mariculture, and other similar uses, that's what they gave us to put in as far as how it was listed as a use. And then in the comp plan, there was a definition of what aquaculture, mariculture and other similar uses was. So I don't know if that matters at all, but just to give you a background of why we had that, that's where it came from, is she told us to put that in there. On the ESWD, so this property does have ESWD already, but most of the other properties have already been developed or removed. So I don't agree with this idea of further restricting this property until you identify what other properties you're removing, because we really don't have very many other properties to remove. And to that point, these property owners have had their rights restricted for over 30 years because of this zoning issue. So I am adamantly against that concept. I also wanted to touch on the question about the truck shop. In the comp plan, it refers to the old truck shop. That's on a different piece of property. But to clarify, yes, Moore Mill does have their truck shop on tax lot 1500 or 100. This is 3 properties total, to answer the other question. And there are no other segment 8 properties.
And do you happen to have do you know what the sizes of the 3 properties are approximately?
Like total combined?
No,
is
no, no.
Each individual one?
Individual.
Not off the top of my head. You'd have to pull up the GIS.
I was gonna say, we can pull up the
That's easy enough to answer.
Hughes
on-
County ArcGIS on Google and we can zoom in. Nikki can help you with that.
While we're waiting, back to the residents. I mean, you've got people that are potentially working there, they're from out of the area. So they're coming in for, even if it's a limited amount of time. I would think some sort of a dorm arrangement would be very unattractive for people, I think. And for me, it just makes more sense that it be individual housing.
Well, it does to me too, but I think that we're getting ahead of
We are
ourselves
getting
right
ahead of
now.
ourselves.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think that that's really an issue here.
especially if you have another type to go through. But the other thing to consider is to add additional layers that it has to be clustered, instead of scattered throughout the site. And then at least it's, clustered together and this part of the property is zoned that way. And then down the road, if there's an issue and you want to pull it out and put it into CD or an R residential zone at that time, it's easy to designate that and move it.
But like I say, we're getting ahead of ourselves
Yeah,
here.
Yeah, correct. And as you recall in our work session, we talked about other uses that the Oregon Model Code says to put into heavy industrial. And I think we all agree that we don't like all of those. We don't want a prison down there for example.
Or a steel.
So
Let's put
I
a
think,
steel mill in.
yeah, I think that's why it got scaled back to be the proposal it is. And I think Dana's right that it encompasses most uses that we would envision having on the waterfront. Were there questions for me specifically? Will we have another opportunity to speak perhaps? Well, this was a question for the commissioners, so. Do you want me to read it off? I can
What was
read
the
it off.
question?
Oh, it's okay. I can read it off.
Open.
though. So tax lot 1500 is 2.78 acres and tax lot 100 is 25.6. And there's that little one down at the bottom
Which
Just down
is,
here. Dan.
on the south.
One,
One.
just in like the armpit of that one. Down on the very, no, that's. After.
0.56 out acres on that one. Do you want to, since we have this up, do you want to look at the other ESWD properties just so that you can show us how many more there are or which ones?
Oh,
might
I
get
think
removed?
the other ESWD is the, well, it's the fisheries building, the old port building. If you want to scroll over to Old Town. Sorry, June.
There was a change in the early 90s that removed from the fisheries all to Hydock.
Well, the port,
What's that?
that building is also ESWD now. the water
You know.
building. Well, can you go over?
some
Lone
people
Mark?
gotta have their cell
Sorry,
phones.
just gave me.
This one.
And then all the way west from there, correct?
We can go back to the shoreland map and it'll tell you whichever ones are 3E. Sorry, I could have printed this out.
My point is, you can't really restrict this property until you identify which properties you would want to remove from that overlay. I guess I'm
You don't
protecting my
have
right
to.
to.
I just brought it up as a conversation point, but we can totally drop it if it's not interesting.
Yeah, I don't think we need to restrict it.
Yeah, I don't either.
The one thing I was gonna bring up to Sherry's point about dwelling versus dwelling unit, this is just another funny thing about our code that we have both dwelling, which is defined as a building or a portion thereof designed or used for human occupancy as a residence for one or more persons, not including vehicles, travel trailers, or camping vehicles. But then we also have dwelling unit, which means a building or a portion of a building that has independent living facilities, including provisions for sleeping, cooking, and sanitation. And it goes on to be much more restrictive than dwelling. So I think that's a very good point. I probably looked at dwelling instead of dwelling unit when I wrote this. So there may be a different way to talk about residential units. If there's a specific way, to Catherine's point, if you want them to look a certain way, we might just have to define it further in this particular code so that we're not getting caught between is it a dwelling or a dwelling unit,
All right.
which is really goofy. Sorry about that. And thanks for bringing that up. And I also might recommend that I think because there are some questions here tonight, you may want to have discussion and then continue this hearing. I don't think there's any rush. You guys can, they can talk about it if they want, but to further define if you want to, what residential units look like in the code.
Well, would anybody object if we just discussed, are there any more public people? Oh, yes, sir. Are you a public person?
Good evening. Robert S. Miller III, who goes by Robin Miller. I'm here tonight as an owner representative for Moore Mill. I was also a former port commissioner. So first I'll start with sort of an Academy Award thanks speech. I'd like to thank Jeff Griffin for bringing this potential opportunity to us, Moore Mill. I'd like to thank Sherry McGrath for her deep dive into the comprehensive plan and the statutes, to Dana for must have been years of effort on this to learn at council. And of course, to all of you for giving some part of your life to help us through this. It has been frustrating lately. It's, our instincts are, this is really cool. It's a cool thing to think about. You have this site, it feels like a good match, but it feels frustrating when someone comes with a proposal and you're spending literally a year and a half just trying to figure out what it's zoned. I mean, literally until tonight and maybe next meeting, we won't know for certain as to whether it's actually heavy industrial or controlled development as a certain matter. And so obviously we premise this upon, we're going to start with the premise that it's heavy industrial and work with that. But again, if you're trying to advance a concept, a project, you need to know like the basic thing. What is it actually zoned? And of course, what with the other ambiguities in the plan, what we're trying to do is just simply resolve the most basic questions so we can start to evaluate things further. That's my first point. Thanks to everybody for bringing us to this point, and thank you for your efforts and your time in helping us along here. The second thing I want to express is that this project is incredibly speculative at this point. It's a cool idea. We do not have the secret plans that we're waiting to show everybody. We have back of the napkin things. We had a consultant, a proposer who came up with some, I guess you call them pro forma spreadsheets that show, sure, this could all work out. But of course, I remember, as my father is fond of reminding me, he's never seen a bad business plan, right? 30 years ago, I remember, excited potential cranberry growers showing me, look, cranberry prices will always increase, more acres, more money. And, so it's such an obvious thing to invest in cranberries. So obviously there's a lot of questions here. Where's the capital? What exactly is your plan? The market is relatively new and untested. What exactly is the technology to accomplish things? And against all that backdrop, you have myriad of regulations. Even before you get to land use, you've got all the industrial and state regulations about things. You've got the market conditions to worry about. And then, of course, you know, the kind of landscape of land use to navigate around. So there's a lot of questions, and what we're doing here is just simply taking a stab at sort of having enough guidance, enough potential permission to be able to tease out a real proposal, but make the limitations reasonable enough for the public interest, but at the same time, open enough to encourage this discussion. As to housing, I think it was pretty much just a stab. And just in our clients and various experiences, there seems to be need for student housing or for itinerant housing and the like. We're just taking a stab at it. And part of the reason that we're kind of tumbling it in now, there was some discussion about how complicated do we make the proposal for tonight. We don't want to make it overly complicated or overreach, but we also know that if you don't do it now, you might have to wait another few years before you have an opportunity to ask again. And in the meantime, you know, potential opportunities might have moved on. So thank you for bearing with us. We are all trying to take a stab at what, you know, to be able to present a package to a proposer and say, yeah, there's enough of an opportunity here that we can have a real discussion with you. It's never going to be quite shovel ready, right? There's a lot to do, but at least this advances the discussion. So I think that's my general remarks. Just thank you for opening this up. I think it's really fair to say that you don't have to worry that if you say yes to some palette of potential uses or conditional uses, that suddenly the horses have gotten out of the barn or whatever the idiom is. I mean, a lot has to happen. There has to be a lot of discussion, a lot of public scrutiny, a lot of permit requesting before anything can happen on the site. So all this is just simply saying, yes, there's a potential opportunity. You can ask further questions and have further discussions. So those, I think, are my remarks, as specific and vague as they are. I'm happy to take any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll be around for questions. Thank you.
Wait a minute.
Oh, it's not a question. I just wanted to clarify that the city council did pass a resolution previously, and I have the date in here, memorializing the findings that the property is zoned heavy industrial, not controlled development
Oh,
one.
Okay, lovely.
So that decision has already been made. If you haven't gotten a copy of that, I am happy to send that on to you,
Okay,
which I'll
great.
do after this meeting.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That was step one. Before we could do this, we had to figure out what the zoning was. So,
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
How
well,
long
thank
ago
you.
was that, Dana?
I put the date in here, I believe. I don't have the date. Sorry, it was last year. It was resolution 23-15. So it would have been in 2023.
Thank you.
Yes. I will send that to you, Robin.
So that's saying that what we're doing now is just paperwork.
What you're doing now is making a change to the code. So before, the question of this particular parcel was, is it zoned CD1 or is it zoned heavy industrial? If it was zoned CD1, there was specific language in our comprehensive plan that said you could not do aquaculture on a CD1 or on a CD site. A controlled development site. So when the city council found that the property had never actually been rezoned, it would revert back to its original zoning, which was heavy industrial, which is a zone that otherwise would have allowed aquaculture. So we're sort of just adding in it. We're untangling what became a very big mess of one sort of inadvertent map change many years ago, which led to multiple code changes and map changes and comprehensive plan changes. So we're cleaning it up.
Okay, I'm sort of implying, or what I was trying to, does that open it up now for Robin and his group to start offering the opportunity to,
Do aquaculture?
yeah,
Well, I would say if they wanted to do it on the 50-foot buffer of the site, they could, but that doesn't seem like a lot of space or very functional. So what this does is this code amendment would allow aquaculture on the entire site.
Which is what we're doing here.
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
Okay.
So that is just paperwork, just allowing it.
Okay.
Well, what I would like to do is, thank you, is discuss few of these, the details here. Unless you want to do it some other time.
Is that the end of public comment? I just,
That is the end of public comment.
okay.
Sure,
If we asked.
let's ask again.
I'm just curious about on Zoom. I don't know if, is there anyone on Zoom? No. Okay. Just wanted to be sure everyone had their chance.
Oh, sorry,
No, no, you
I
good.
forget Zoom. Anyway, I would like to have at least a small discussion here tonight to get things going on the issues that we're gonna have to deal with. I mean, I think that just a few details. I think that the 1,000 foot per unit is too small. And, but I don't know, how do we want to deal with this?
I think the most important question to be answered is, are we going to approve the code change so that aquamarine can, or excuse me, aquaculture, I don't want to say aquamarine, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, aquaculture can be, those projects can be put on heavy industrial zone land and banded.
Okay, well
That's the
then,
basic question.
along with that is, are the residences going to be outright permitted or are they going to be conditional use? Are we going to have to approve them separately or are they going to go along with aquaculture?
Okay, if I may, I think what
Mm.
Commissioner Norman is trying to say is the first step would be, is everyone okay with just generally allowing aquaculture?
Are you asking for separate votes?
No, I
No,
think just to
think just
start the
opinion.
discussion, before
Okay.
you get too far into the details, like, does everyone agree with the basic fact of allowing aquaculture in the heavy industrial zone?
I think we
Yeah.
need to have a discussion about excluding certain types of aquaculture,
I think
such
that,
as
yeah,
fish and crustacean farming. And also, I think, and I'm not obviously, well, not obviously, I'm not a biologist, I'm an accountant. And we may have some biologists here. But there's also, I think, a question of, do we allow, or do we restrict the aquaculture to just onshore? Or do we allow it in the actual river?
This proposal, I believe,
Be
didn't I read that it was onshore?
So that
Where
would
did I read
be,
that?
so the so if it's or if aquaculture is allowed, it would be strictly onshore.
That's what
that's
okay,
correct,
that's how
because
it's
our
written.
code has a separate code for the water district and for any uses in water. We then would fall under the estuary code as
Okay.
well, or estuary parts of our comprehensive plan.
I think that we can't assume that this land is going to be used for this idealized project. And it seems to me that what we want to really do is to not make the city vulnerable to having this parcel used in a manner that we don't like. We don't want a steel mill there, we don't want to oil drilling, whatever sorts of things. You brought up the crustacean farming.
Fish
okay?
farming.
And why, I don't know why we don't want that, but. what
There's
we-
some environmental issues that I've read
Mhm.
about. Once again, I'm not a biologist, but there's
Right,
many,
right.
many folks have written about potential environmental damage
Right.
from fish farming and or crustacean farming.
And so I don't know how you the environmental protections are already supposed to be there, right?
Are they?
Mm,
Who is if we say fish farming is allowed, who is protecting the environment in that case?
Are you talking about onshore?
I'm asking Gordon, but
Oh.
if you know the answer.
But I don't know.
I'm not sure I know the answer completely, and again, we can do a little.
Might have an answer.
Jeff, we have a phone a friend over here. Can you talk into the mic? Sorry. You're a bummer.
I do have a degree in biology, so it's marine biology.
Okay.
I've been in aquaculture for a number of years. So there's a lot of other oversight. ODFW, for example, they have a fish propagation license that they require for for this sort of thing. DEQ has a stormwater discharge permit that's required. If you're doing any, a lot of the utility work that you need to serve the farm, goes through NOAA Fisheries, U.S. Army Corps, Department of State Lands, ODFW, a few other agencies, ODA, we of course look at it. So there is a lot of other bodies that will have oversight onto it. We're not, we haven't really delved into looking at crustacean farming. Finfish, I guess I wouldn't want to rule it out completely. It may be something that you'd want to have further review on, a different review process for finfish. But there could be some use for those sorts of things. Our focus, of course, is seaweed, marine algae, and urchins, echinoderms, and some mollusks, I guess, marine mollusks, as opposed to, shrimp farming or something like that. So those are unlikely. If those don't go forward, we still want to keep going with our proposal, but I guess I'd suggest maybe you just treat those through a different review process. Because I know, yeah, salmon farming certainly is very controversial, and we're not proposing salmon farming. There could be potentially another type of finfish that might be appropriate, applicable. Maybe, we potentially would be looking at maybe doing some conservation aquaculture, mariculture work, where you could augment a species in the wild that needs some restoration, and it could be a site that could potentially play a role there. Anyways, yeah, there are numerous other oversight agencies though involved in.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff.
So it seems to me that if in fact we're on board with the aquaculture and mariculture being added to an approved use in the heavy industrial area, what we're really interested in is trying to protect not the river and the ocean from unnecessary or any pollution, really, right? Although we're running boats in and out of there all the time, and that pollutes the water, which we don't often acknowledge to ourselves. But is there a way to create, I guess, does the city need to do anything explicit to say, yeah, we're good with aquaculture happening in our heavy industrial area, but we somehow want to put some controls on it, some sort of environmental controls, which maybe we don't need because there are other agencies that are responsible for that.
I wouldn't want to start defining environmental controls. I don't think any of us are qualified for that.
No, we certainly aren't. And to be frank with you, I think that how many residences are on the property, if in fact this business goes forward, how many residents are on the property? I just think that's all window dressing. I don't know if if that's the most important thing. Basic question is yes or no on aquamarine or aquaculture, or aquamarine for that matter, or even maritime marine, I mean, that's the basic question.
And if I can just add in maybe a procedural thing. So when Jeff, for example, applied to do aquaculture at the port site, the city signs what's called a LUX form, a land use compatibility statement, that generally is required by these other agencies. So it sounded to me like when I signed that, Jeff had to go through a whole other bout of paperwork from all these other entities in order to do what he's doing to limit the impact on the environment. So that doesn't necessarily feel like that's something that the city would need to cover or control as far to that level. I mean, there's certainly maybe some other impacts to the community that we might look at, but it sounds like that's probably in the purview of other entities. And we're really just thinking about the land use portion of it. Does that?
And to respond to Gordon's question, I really want to thank Robin and Jeff for their testimony, and to say that I think this is a truly unique opportunity for Bandon, and from the first time it was brought before the commission, I could see that there was a lot of thought that was put into it, and that it was research-based, that there was a lot of science and genuine care for the community being put into the proposal, and to what we were hoping to see come out of it. And the visit to the port cemented that for me. I think this is a truly unique opportunity for economic development. Having a aquaculture research zone in Bandon would be amazing for a lot of our citizens, from the kids in school all the way up to business owners. And I would kind of like to revise the dormitory housing to just a higher density housing on the site. But I wholeheartedly support this, and have for the entire time that we've looked at it. And I would love to just move through some of the roadblocks, and I think this is a great opportunity, and I'd like to see it move forward, at least to the city council. I think we've thought about it for a year, and it can move forward.
Sounds to me like across the members here that it's pretty much agreed that we want to approve aquaculture on the site. And so I think now it's just a matter of how is it worded and how do we work it out? And what's your thought, Dana?
Well, why don't you guys talk about it? Because I'm having Shayla look at what I'm scribbling over here. So there's got to be other discussion amongst you.
Do we need to do something about the housing separate, keep it the way it is? What do we, I mean, we didn't really define that.
I think the biggest concern about the housing is if we're saying it's okay for heavy industrial, what if we don't get mariculture there? What if we get something else? So
No, but with the
gotta
housing,
control that.
but the way that this reads is that it has to be directly related to
the aquaculture.
what you're doing there. And so if you get a steel mill, you're gonna it's not aquaculture, but it has to be directly related to that. And who wants to live next to a steel mill?
And
I mean,
No, I know that. That's why we want to control it.
I know, but I don't know that it's that big a deal, you
No,
know,
actually, I don't think it is.
because I think that basically what if we could do is make the housing conditional use, and so that we can look at it before it comes up. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Well, I think a couple of things. One is, not surprisingly, I think a couple of things. One is that we can't assume this property is going to be used for this purpose. This is just a fantasy at this point. And so there may not be any need for residential
Right.
buildings on the property for whatever lands there. So that's why the other thing is that we don't want to make this any more cumbersome. I mean, there are decisions to be made that the planning commission doesn't need to be involved in necessarily. It's a staff decision, right?
It depends upon how we approach it.
Exactly.
Got the wording?
Yeah, all right. Thank you for being patient with us while we figure this out. So I'm gonna, based on the conversation here, throw out some ideas. So under limitations on uses, you could amend where it says a density of no more than 1 unit per 2 acres is maintained. You could say a density of no more than 1 dwelling per 2 acres is maintained, because dwelling isn't defined as anything in particular other than like a place for sleeping. So as long as you don't have more than 1 bed per, or whatever it is, 1 area for sleeping. It is far more broad than dwelling unit. It doesn't require that each dwelling unit have facilities for cooking and sanitation. There could be shared facilities. So if you wanted to do a dormitory style, you could. So a density of no more than 1 dwelling per 2 acres is maintained. Alternatively, an applicant may request additional dwellings through a type 2 request process. So that's that sort of like alternative path. You could also change the total square footage of such a unit must be less than 1,000 square feet to something like the total square footage of all residential uses must be less than 5,000 square feet. So you're sort of just taking it and shrinking it, and you could again allow for a type 2 path if they wanted to exceed that number. And again, those numbers are, you can modify. You can also, for crustacean and finfish, only allow that through a type 2 or type 3 process if you want to be able to consider it.
Right.
If there's a particular proposal that maybe isn't environmentally or as environmentally impactful, you can just create a separate path for that that isn't outright permitted.
I like it.
What do you think?
What she said.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's exactly what what she said.
Do those numbers feel right to you? The like 1 dwelling per 2 acres and then total 5, because they could do just a big 5,000 square foot dormitory.
Right. Could house more people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Or you could change that. You could change, I just want to make sure that this is your opportunity to provide comment on those numbers or those ratios, so.
Didn't you-
Yes, I don't like that, but I'd
It-
rather have them, go ahead.
I was gonna say, didn't you say something about if they wanted them to be larger to have a different path?
Yes, that if you wanted to do so, because with housing, everything we do with housing has to be outright permitted, so you have to set the clear and objective path, which would be allowing 1 dwelling unit per 2 acres or 5,000 square feet, that sort of thing. I guess I should say or they can go through a type 2 process where they can request something different. Does that feel good? Or type 3? It's up to you. Do you want to hear it or not?
Type 2 is fine.
If, for housing in industrial, I'd like to hear it.
Then that would be a type 3 process. So just,
But
And 3
Just
is
know-
2.
do you need to hear it?
If you need to hear
Do we need to hear? You might want to, but do we need to, really?
I mean, I think the difference between so a type 2, we notice properties within 100 square feet, and I think it's 10 days in advance of our decision. So it's a limited noticing period and a limited noticing time, and our decision is made right after that. So we can issue those types of decisions in less than 2 months, whereas conditional uses generally take 3 to 6 months
Yeah.
plus.
Fast.
So,
They've already waited so long.
okay, see, I'm glad we went over that.
See, I like most of what you said. I don't like the concept of a 5,000 square foot.
I don't either.
I think that's fair. So do you?
I would be fine with, 10 500 square foot clustered houses, cottages or something like that.
So is there another way? I mean, yeah, it's up to you. If you want to set the total square footage of all of them have to be less, then, I mean, Bear just said Chair Slothauer just said the opposite, that you wanted to see those units be allowed to be up to 1,200 square feet.
Right.
So,
Can we change?
Yeah, sure.
Well, then. How about the discussion whether we just increase it to 1,200?
Yeah,
or you can get rid of you could get rid of the either 1 dwelling per 2 acres and just do a square footage and not limit the number of dormitories they can fit inside. Or you can still limit the number of dwellings, but not limit the square footage. I think, we had just added those in as more sort of parameters.
So we could say limit of 5 dwellings and then not put a square footage on it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to limit the overall square footage if you don't want to.
I'm fine with that.
I think I'd be okay with that.
Because I mean, I guess it already says incidental and subordinate too. So my guess is as long as it's not, I'm looking at Shayla for some assistance here. As long as it's not half of the site is all dwellings.
I think we need a limit.
Yeah, you're
I
probably
think we need
right.
a square foot limit. It can be liberal, it can
Yeah.
be conservative. I think 1,000 is too little. I think 5,000 is too much. Maybe a midpoint, 2,500, 3,000 square foot per 2 acre parcel,
No, I don't think we want, I mean, that's a big house.
3,000 square feet?
Yeah.
No, I was thinking more like 12 to 15.
No, sorry, it's the total square footage of
All
all
units.
residential.
Oh,
Maybe
So-
they'd make 3 units, or maybe they'd have a dormitory and a caretaker house.
okay, I see
something
what you're
like that. I
saying.
think they could make their decision based on their needs.
Yeah, but I think if we're gonna say a limit of no more than 5, that, I mean, just my opinion, I would argue for 6,000 square feet, so you could make a little over 1,000. I mean, 1,200 kind of, it's big enough to have a few people in there, but you get down to 1,000 and it's starting to get small. Anyway, that's my opinion. I'd go with 6,000 total of the 5 units,
I
or
don't,
however many units.
I mean,
I'm-
public comment is closed, but I'm just kind of curious.
Well, they're not even at that point, I think they said, of even thinking about it, so.
But
not sure
but
we
we
can
want to
set a
get this
standard
down on,
here.
but we
Right,
want to
but we
get
can
this
set a
down on
standard
paper,
here.
so we're just,
Well, what's fair and equitable? I think that's what we have to decide, or what's reasonable.
I think that's reasonable. But what does everybody else think?
I think.
I think I was happy with 1,000, but I'm willing to go to the 1,200.
Okay,
There used to be pumping stations across upstate New York. Natural gas pumping stations. They all had housing on the properties for the people who had to run the pumps. And they were probably less than 1,000 square feet, and
But would you
families
wanna
live
live
there.
in, but would you wanna live in?
Well, I don't know how many families of 4 are gonna be, you know, living there while they're working at the
I'd like to see them at least 1,200.
facility. I'm fine with the 5 and 5,000 myself. I'm not gonna.
I think we need to be really careful restricting any housing, since our mandate is all housing is needed housing.
Well, this is a specialized housing.
yeah, this is,
But people decide where they live. If the housing's available, they can decide to live there or not.
not really, because the people who live there have to be related to the project. I mean, it's not, they can't just rent to anybody.
But it's better to have more housing available and nobody using it than not enough. And I just hate to restrict any type of housing when it's all theoretical at this point.
I agree with that.
And if I may, just to clarify, because I had to talk this through. So what we're talking about is a dwelling could have multiple bedrooms in it. We're not defining what a bedroom or what a dwelling looks like. It could be a dormitory, it could be a
Right.
single family dwelling, it could be any sort of like combination. And so you could have one 5,000 square foot dwelling, or if you had a 10,000 or a 10 acre parcel, or you could have 5 smaller individual things. So I don't think that a 5,000 square foot dormitory is that outrageous when you think about a 10 acre parcel. And that then allows them, or the property owners or whomever goes in there to determine what's best for the use that they have. Is it building smaller, Bear and I had looked at the ones at the Oregon Institute of Marine Biology. They have like small 2-story houses that I think are 1 or 2 bedrooms with shared facilities. Or is it more like a college dorm with 10 bunks and shared facility? You know what I mean? So I think you're allowing them to determine what works best for them, and you're just limiting the overall impact, the number of dwellings, the number of buildings on site, and then the total square footage of that use.
Okay, so something like what you're saying is something like no more than 5 dwellings and 6,000 square feet total.
Or 5.
I don't think so.
Or
I want
6.
Should we even be addressing any kind of housing right now?
Well, just.
Because we're looking at this as a industrial project
But they're
of some
looking,
sort.
but they're looking for a solution to include housing, and if we make it be a process that's even longer and more involved, I just feel like it's just making hardship for the people who might want to develop.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're out of line wanting to put down as much detail as we can right now without getting into real detail. Because that's gonna, just like she says, make it easier for somebody to come in, look at it and go, okay, we can do that, or we can't do that. You know.
Couldn't we make housing a conditional use?
No, that's
Yeah,
what
we-
she said,
No,
no.
because the
can't.
state requires that all housing has to have clear and objective processes, standards and criteria. The only time you can do a conditional use or a type 2 is if you have a clear and objective path. So you have to have, if you
Alright.
want to have housing, you have to have something that you can do without the
Have
planning
something in
commission.
place for it, yeah.
Yeah,
So theoretically, if we limit it, and I'm pushing for 6,000 square feet, they could possibly make 5 different dwellings, but they don't all have to be identical in size. So they can
correct.
do what they want.
Right,
that's correct.
that's what I like.
That's what I want.
But they could make the 6,000 square foot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they
don't,
could, they
Okay.
could.
I mean, I wouldn't care. I'm just,
I would care, but they can't. you know?
So are you ready to make a motion, do you think?
So would somebody like to make a motion?
It's going to be a complicated one, and I'm happy to read out again what I think that you have discussed, and then you can say so moved if you want. So it sounds to me like you are trying to say that you would recommend to the city council approval of the amendments as presented with the changes to Title 17.56.040 limitations on use, and you would be adding to number 2 that I did 2 and 2, it should be 2A. A density of no more than 1 dwelling per 2 acres is maintained. Alternatively, an applicant may request additional dwellings through a type 2 process. Also stating the total square footage of all residential uses must be less than 6,000 square feet. And adding in a requirement, which would be 2D, crustacean and finfish farming shall only be permitted through a type 2 process.
What is the fine line between fish and fin fish? Is there a difference?
No.
No? Okay, thank you.
so if we want to make that motion, can we say what she said?
So moved. I so moved.
So moved.
Did
Second.
you so move?
I so moved it.
I second it.
Okay.
Okay, let's take a vote. Tom?
Oh, here, Commissioner Orsi.
Oh, okay.
Who?
Isn't that you?
Yes.
You vote yes. Okay, Commissioner Scobie,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jerkowski.
Yes,
I think I skip you.
You skipped me.
Commissioner Norman,
Yes.
Commissioner Frey,
Yes.
Commissioner Starbuck.
Yes,
It's like the
Alright.
Keystone Cops up here.
Okay, the motion is,
Thank you all for tolerating us.
the motion is passed. And I'm glad that was fairly painless. I think it's a really good thing.
me too.
And for those interested, we do have it scheduled before the city council on March 4th, 2024 at 7 PM. I think it's March 4th. Yeah, okay. And I will bring them your recommendation. So should you have any additional comments to make, that will be the time.
Okay, the next is a work session. Oh, that is that we are closing the hearing, right? What?
At 8.
Right?
Yeah, at 8:40.
Nine.
We're closing the hearing at 8:40.
Close.
Okay,
Thanks for that.
yeah, we gotta have that gavel, yeah.
He doesn't follow my script.
I know.
And then,
Do we
so,
re- do we really want to go to this work session?
Do you want to attend? Thank you.
Yes.
and thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you.
A work session to determination of lot lines and fences. We've discussed this before and it's a pain in the ass.
Well,
And it takes a long time.
tell us how you really feel, Bear.
Please,
Well, if that's how you feel, imagine how the planning department feels trying to implement this. So for those of you unfamiliar, the city has code that regulates lot lines. So that would be how we make a determination about what is your front lot line, your side lot lines, your rear lot line. And that all goes into all the development of the property, your setbacks, where sorts of things can be placed, how tall things can be. And in particular, we're running into an issue with corner lots. So on a corner lot, here's my example. Corner lot, this is Beach Loop Drive, this is Beach Loop Drive, this is Three Wood Drive. This is the front of your lot because the code says it's the narrower of the two. So if you have two lot lines that are abutting a street or doesn't even have to be a publicly open street, just a right of way. The narrower of the two is the front. So if this is the front, then that means your setback from here is 20 feet. And then your setback from here is 15 feet. When you put your house in here. But some people on lots like this like to face their houses towards the longer side, in which case we're happy to address them because we address them wherever their front door is. However, their front lot line stays the same. So the house is still 20 feet from that narrower lot line and 15 feet from here. What becomes really bizarre though is when you start to apply the fence code, which says that fences on your front, in your front yard setback, which would be this section here. So remember your house is here, faces this way. This has to be 4 feet. And then this second section can be 6 feet, and then this section can be 8 feet. So it does.
I'm sorry, you have three different sections, but I only see two. So you have you have
Front, this would be your front yard setback,
and then-
your side yard setbacks,
and a rear.
and then your rear yard setback. So this is 10 feet from your property line. You can have an 8-foot tall fence.
Okay.
I don't know the origin of why we selected these numbers. There was a question about that. I could not tell you, but my guess is that we wanted to be an approachable community where we had shorter fences in the front of our houses, maybe more welcoming. It just makes for a really weird design. So we had someone who built their house facing this way. They now want to put their 4-foot tall fence here and their 6-foot tall fence here, and we can't permit that. And it ends up looking very bizarre otherwise, though. So I think my question for you is, should we make an interpretation that fences should be placed in relation to where the front of the house is instead of the front yard? Do we need to do a code amendment for that?
I like that. The front of the house is where the front door is.
And that's where the front yard fence should be, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I feel fine with using that interpretation as long as the planning commission feels comfortable with it. Unless you want to make an amendment to our ordinance. And we could do that in the code cleanup as well.
You could show us some pictures of Frankenstein, how this is a really bad idea.
I have,
But it strikes me
Go
as
ahead.
being pretty simple.
yeah,
I really like this interpretation, and you can all come to my house that has this configuration and check it out. It makes perfect sense.
Oh, gosh. Catherine, that's funny. I'll have to check your house out because there's another one I'm thinking of where they built their 4-foot fence and then inside of the property line further, they built a taller fence. And so there's just this weird fenced in area. Yeah, because they have the same thing. They're on a corner lot and they're just trying to, make it look somewhat normal, but it ends up looking like Frankenstein. So
Yeah, I think that that's a reasonable interpretation. Does anybody else not like it?
Some common sense
No,
approach.
it's fine.
Yeah.
would you like to see it codified in the next code cleanup?
Yes.
Just so the next planner doesn't have this problem?
Sure.
Okay, but we'll just change our interpretation of the code and application from here on out.
Oh, does that mean you're leaving
What do you mean?
the next planner?
Oh, well, I'm gonna die at some point,
Oh,
maybe here, who knows?
deal with this problem herself.
Do we have to keep checking your office back there to see?
Yeah,
if
it's
you're alive?
possible. I won't be here forever, but I'm here for the foreseeable future.
You probably will be here longer than some of us.
that's right.
Oh, man, hard. Okay, cool. Thank you so much for that input.
And so the setbacks remain the same though. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
the setbacks would remain the
Only-
same.
We're only changing the.
Just where they can build their fence.
Yeah, the
and how
fence.
high it can be.
Height
Okay,
of the-
Mhm.
sounds good.
But I like that idea. Front door at the front of the house.
Yes, it's amazing how complicated it can be. So thank you.
Okay, could we have your planning department report? please?
Sure thing. Well, it is the start of a new year, so our numbers are sort of low on here, but you'll see,
Do we need to do any sort of a vote on that?
Yeah, I was wondering that as well.
we need a vote. Yeah, I think for now, this conversation is enough for us to change our application of the code, and then you will codify it in the code cleanup this year.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you for asking for that clarification. Okay, so 3 single-family dwelling requests. My box of requests is overloaded right now, so we're definitely starting to see a little pick up in applications. So I have to get to work. We do have I think 5 requests for accessory dwelling units so far, which means half of the
Money.
waivers of system development charges have been taken up by ADUs, which I think is exciting. Nikki continues to be incredibly busy at the front counter, so I'm very grateful that we hired her. So she is able to take care of a lot of questions, and I think she is learning a lot on the spot all the time. The other thing to note is that you all had a work session on Monday to discuss the transportation system plan. You're welcome to discuss that more tonight if you wanted to provide any additional input. This is also a reminder that you have until the end of the month to fill out the transportation system plan survey, which was sent out. It is on the city's website under the planning department page. Long-range planning projects, transportation system plan. There's also a survey available for the beach access connector, which is that Beach Loop Drive pathway. That's on its own page under long-range planning. So there's 2 separate surveys. I don't want folks to get confused. The other update is that the city council did not take action on the public access ordinance. Remind me, I don't think we've talked about the changes in recreational immunity. Did we did discuss that?
Mary has, and I've heard of
Okay.
other
Yeah.
places, but if you want
Go.
to, go for it.
Do you want to do it?
Sure.
She has the legal brain.
So recently, the courts in Oregon have sort of struck down some elements of recreational immunity. There is a case out of Newport, Fields v. City of Newport, I believe, in which an individual fell walking on an improved trail to the beach. And it went to the courts, and the courts decided that that particular trail, because it was improved and it was going to an area in which a person would recreate, that there was no recreational immunity on that trail because it was being used to get from point A to point B, instead of just merely being used to take a walk on. They were using it as a transportation system to get from point A to point B. And so there was no recreational immunity over that trail in that circumstance, which threw all of our insurance carriers and cities on the coast for a real loop. It's my understanding that the legislature in the short session is taking that issue up and is going to do a text fix in the Oregon state statutes to correct that situation so that we once again will have recreational immunity over such circumstances. But they still have to vote on it, and I think they go into session February 5th or something like that. So we'll see what comes of that.
Thank you.
And that because of that, I noticed there are signs up on some of the paths that people use down to the beach that
Unimproved.
well, no, they just say from the Face Rock Inn, you know, they have a path down there and they put a sign up said not for public use, you know, guests only and stuff. So that, and there's another one too that did the same thing, basically said, no, you can't use this anymore, which really is not a good idea, but anyway, so that's some of the consequences.
One of the creative fixes I heard was to put up a sign that says for recreational use only, so that you can't claim you were not recreating on that trail. So could work.
Makes sense.
No,
No,
that's not, it's not going to work because it actually goes to the user's intent of using the trail, not
No.
necessarily what the trail is labeled for.
Ugh. Complicated legality.
But if so,
Um,
somebody uses it when it says you can't use it, then they're on their own. Is that true?
Probably not.
Probably not, in my opinion, because it's still an improved area. I think that's a tough call, which is why the legislature needs to step in and fix the situation, frankly.
Mhm.
I heard on JPR that just exactly what you said, that they were intending to do that.
That's what I've heard as well.
Yeah.
Well, let's all hope for the best because the city council tabled the public access ordinance until that is resolved.
Makes sense.
So that was not adopted. And we'll keep you in the loop on that if we hear more. The other thing to note is that we received an application for a new vacation rental dwelling. It has been deemed complete, so it is being scheduled for your February meeting. That will be a public hearing. The Gravel Point approval was appealed by 2 entities and will be heard before the city council on February 21st at 6 p.m. That is a Wednesday. So you all can go to that because you're now off the hook.
Dana, can
Right?
since you brought up Gravel Point,
Yeah.
when, apparently they have, redone part of their proposal is what they indicated, they being the Gravel Point folks at the, public meeting they held last week. When do they have to submit that proposal?
Well,
Yes.
I'm looking at Shayla. I mean, generally, all testimony has to be received if they want it in the city council packet, at like a week in advance. So I would hope that we get it at least by then.
Okay.
Because we have not received it yet.
Right, okay.
So,
But-
so does this mean that the two appeals have been heard?
No, the appeal, so it was appealed by 2 different entities, but the appeal hearing, so it has not been heard yet, will be before the city council on that date listed here, February 21st.
Is there something about that process that I understood from a comment you made that maybe we weren't following procedure the way we were supposed to?
That was not your fault, that was my fault. So don't feel bad, none of you did anything wrong. What we should have done and what we will have to do from here on out is adopt findings that are reduced to writing after each public hearing. So at the vacation rental public hearing, that's the first time you'll see it, where you'll be adopting or approving the decision and then adopting findings that we will pre-populate for you to have in your packet. If there's any changes you want to make to those, we can always come back the next month and change them. But
Okay,
yeah, so it's just adopting, essentially, maybe you can describe it better than I can, but the findings are how you found the application in conformance with each of the criteria. And the requirement is that it has to be reduced to writing and signed by the planning commission chair.
okay. All right.
Yeah, so you can't just talk about it. It can't just be in the record. It has to physically be written down.
Okay, I just,
You have to adopt those findings at a public meeting.
Yes.
So, you can do that at the first meeting if it's clean.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, the findings come back to you for adoption.
Yes.
And
Okay.
the city council is going to be hearing this de novo, is my understanding. So they're
Yes.
going to be hearing it all over again with
Mhm.
all the testimony and everything, anything that's new.
So we're done. with it.
Sure.
That's right. Yeah.
So do we need to do anything additionally regarding this, decision about
Gravel.
aquaculture?
No, because we don't have to do findings. if
No,
it's-
not for a legislative matter like this. For your quasi judicial applications, you have to adopt findings. For a legislative action like this, like a code change, you do not.
okay. Thank you.
Because this is going to the city
Good question.
council for.
Correct. You're a
That's correct.
You're a recommending body, not the decision-making body.
Right.
Right.
Thank you. And then the other things that I wanted to let you know that are not in here. Oh, there's one more thing in here is just that we are currently pursuing an intergovernmental agreement with the Lane Council of Governments to begin having a GIS program. The planning department and public works both have money in our budget this year, $10,000 each, to hire a consultant to start developing those layer files that you need. So our hope is by the end of this that we will have a public facing GIS, which is that online mapping system that will have a parcel zoning, where the water lines are, sewer lines, storm drainage, laterals. These are questions that we get asked a lot that take up a lot of staff time that we are hoping we can now make available and sort of empower the public to find that information on their own. I want to caution you that from what I have heard, it takes a very long time to get up and running. So we probably won't see anything going to the actual public for a year or two. We're going to have to actually clean up the data. We only have paper maps from 1990 and Tim's brain. Most of the information is just in Tim's head. So Jason, who we hired on in the planning department, is going to be out there actually using like an iPad or his phone to geolocate exactly where each of those. Yeah, I'm just gonna push a button and it drops a pin
Oh,
and it
no.
says,
Using the witching, you know,
no, we are not going to be doing that. The whole point is to move into the technological future. So if you have any questions about that or want to learn more, I'm happy to bring you all in the loop.
they-
Just a few other things. The city met with Regional Solutions yesterday, which is an entity out of the governor's office. Her name, our representative is Jessica LaBerge. She brought in representatives from like 15 different entities that are part of the state government. They help get stuck projects unstuck, is I think their sort of informal way of describing things. So we had the opportunity to talk with ODOT about some of the challenges we've had with Highway 101 and our TSP. Jason had the opportunity to share the challenges we've had with gorse removal on the bluff. The Oregon Parks and Recreation Department was there, so we were able to have a more open conversation. We also shared with them our concerns about a lack of available housing, infrastructure, transportation. I sort of felt like by the end, I'm like, wow, we just complained for 2 hours. But I think it was really helpful because we have a lot of people who have money, resources, experience. They now know what our problems are and they're going to work to help us. So that was a very exciting meeting to hold. Tomorrow, Tori and Jason and I are going to Coos Bay to go to the local government roundtable with the Land Conservation and Development Commission, which is sort of like the statewide planning commission, I think is the easiest way to describe it. They help make decisions around and make recommendations on the statewide land use planning goals. So we'll be complaining again, I'm sure, in the same sort of roundtable forum. But that's up in Coos Bay. And then we also, Nikki and Jason and I attended a coastal land use goals training this week with the folks at DLCD, and they went over the unique Oregon land use goals that are specific to the coast, which covered the beaches and dunes, the ocean shores, the estuaries, and the shorelands. That's what it is. If that sounds interesting to you to maybe get a presentation about what those goals are and how they apply to the work that we're doing, I would be happy to set up a Zoom presentation for you guys.
Sure.
Okay. It was very informative for me, and I've been doing this, so I feel like it'd be great for everyone else.
Yeah.
I'll see if Meg is available sometime this year to give us that presentation. Okay, do you have any other questions? And did I miss anything?
And if we do have that presentation, is there potential of putting it on YouTube for?
Yes, great idea. We could do it as just a work session maybe, so that we could have it easily recorded and available for other people. Yeah,
Cool.
I'll find out about that.
Do we know where we are, or not where we are? Do we know where Parametrics is on the contract the city signed with them to I think it was to evaluate walking paths and bike paths, et cetera, on Beach Loop at all?
Yes, yeah,
Are they
so
moving forward? Do we have a timetable on their recommendations?
yeah, I'm sure I have a very broad timetable on that. We do have a page on the city's website, so under that long range planning.
Okay.
That has some of the just very basic paperwork. What they're waiting on right now is we did not get many comments on the survey, so I asked them to keep it open a little bit longer. That survey is available to the public right now, and it's just generally trying to get an idea of what do you want to see? Do you want to see a big pathway? Do you want to see a sidewalk and a bike lane? Do you want to see something more informal, just like an asphalt with a little rolled curb? Which side of the street do you want to see it on?
This isn't the TSP survey, correct?
No.
No, it's a separate one.
I haven't heard of that.
But I went up on it the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I got was a message saying that I couldn't do anything on it. And then I proceeded to answer all the questions.
Oh, let me look into that, because that would be weird.
But again, then it does have the map comments, just like the other one does.
Yeah, it is confusing because we are not, per our contract with for the grant that we got to do the TSP, allowed to combine the two projects. So they have to be in two separate surveys, which I think a lot of people take one and think, well, I took it, I'm done.
I didn't know there was a second one.
Okay, I'll,
Email that you sent after that meeting, you did have the links to both.
Yeah, you did
But,
then.
okay.
yeah, so if you
Okay.
double check, make sure it's on there. And so I did ask them to wait for some additional information. They were also waiting on, like I said, we didn't have any infrastructure info for them, except for old paper maps in Tim's brain. So it took a little bit of time to figure out where the infrastructure is. One of the things that we're most concerned about is cost, and we can limit the cost of whatever pathway is eventually constructed if we limit the impact on existing utilities. That's going to be one of the most expensive things, is just if we have to move utilities around. I believe they are, the next step is they're looking for some one-on-one interviews to do with people along the corridor to talk about some challenges and opportunities. And then I believe we have scheduled an open house sometime coming up. So I can find out more, get you a better like timeline. I have one of those kind of Gantt charts that shows when they expect to complete everything that I can share with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
think moving forward, surveying the citizenry, I mean, it's a really big deal. Thinking about TSP, I mean, 31 responses is,
Abysmal.
it's abysmal, absolutely. And,
Yes.
and whatever time you're saving on the front end, you're losing on the back end because you don't get any buy-in, you know? And I don't know what the answer is, but how to create survey urgency, you know,
Mhm.
like, we're about ready to put a resort in your backyard. So, I mean, that got lots of people going, right?
Yeah.
So, how do we do that with transportation and,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Is it mentioned in the city manager's letter?
That's what I
Yeah.
wondered.
It is, yes, we do have a little blurb in there. The unfortunate thing is that per our contract on the TSP, that survey for this particular section has to close by the end of the month. It should have been closed 2 weeks ago. They've given us a little bit of a buffer, but they just have to do that because of their contract.
But some of these things, you know, that are requiring a survey, really what needs to happen, Dana, is you need to get out there and go to the grocery store and just approach people and, you know.
Yeah,
Go door to door.
Yeah, go
People
door to door.
didn't like me like a lot already. They definitely would hate me if I interrupted their grocery store.
You
Yeah.
can be annoying like me and text your friends and just say, hey, there's a survey on the city.
Yes.
I did that.
I appreciate that. And I think it was a great conversation that we had on Monday about the survey and about how some of our other less complicated surveys, we've gotten 300 to 800 responses on.
Sure.
So if there was I hate to say a way to dumb it down, but it is a more challenging survey than we've sent out before. And maybe there's a way to get more input or feedback on more of those basic items without asking for too much. Maybe just having the comment map would have been the most helpful
Yes.
thing, because people seem to love that.
Anything more than 10 questions is a loser.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna pass that on. And I do also think that the open house will be more successful. So we do the next round of public input will have an open house component to it. In person.
Open house in person, okay.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. Yes. So, but feedback heard loud and clear on the survey, and I will see if I can harass people at the grocery store this weekend, so no one goes shopping.
Cause that's what, that's 1%,
We could also
right? Of the
help.
population?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it.
We
Mhm.
could also help.
Yeah, you do it. Go
You
to the
touch-
grocery
Yeah, you
store.
Touch
annoy
your
people at the
friends, tell
grocery
your
store.
Neighbors. We're part of the solution.
Are we? Okay. I was hoping to put responsibility elsewhere.
We
I'm
saw
sorry.
that.
That's not well with me.
Okay, do any of the commissioners have more comments? The
No.
Commissioner, see? Commissioner Sally?
I do not. I think we've
What?
covered it all. Catherine?
Don't forget Catherine.
Commissioner Catherine?
She leave us?
She's gone.
She's already. left.
Wow.
She's putting kids to bed for, although they have no school.
Comments?
I have nothing to say.
Yes, just thank you again to the band and team, especially those of you here tonight for getting us through this. And thank you, as always, to the folks that show up on Zoom and in person.
Your friends and wife?
Questions or comments? Yeah, thank you. And happy Burns Night. A few hours left for those of us who are of Scottish descent or want to be of Scottish descent.
And I don't have anything, so I am adjourning the meeting as we speak.
9:06.